Welcome to Royal Daily Report, your source for the stories others won't tell. I'm bringing you today's controversial investigation about a family secret that was hidden for decades. Subscribe to Royal Daily Report for the truth behind the royal headlines. The story you're about to hear was never meant to be heard this way. It isn't gentle, it isn't neat, and it certainly isn't comfortable. This is the kind of story families bury, institutions silence, and history quietly edits out. Not because it isn't true, but because saying it out loud changes everything that comes after. At the center of it is Meghan, and standing just behind her in the shadows is her mother, Doria. For years, the world has watched Meghan Markle through carefully framed moments, red carpets, royal balconies, interviews polished to perfection. But this story doesn't live in front of cameras. It lives in missing names, in empty spaces, in details that were never explained because explaining them would open a door that could never be closed again. What you're about to hear isn't rumor. It isn't gossip passed around online. It's a story hidden inside records, silence, and one decision that forced a woman to sit alone while the world watched and pretended not to notice. And if this story is true, even partially, then it explains tears that were never seen, distance that was never explained, and a family secret so heavy it reshaped an entire royal narrative. Once you hear it, you won't look at that wedding, that family, or that silence the same way again. Because some secrets don't just change reputations, they change bloodlines. Stay with Royal Daily Report for this shocking investigation. In May of 2018, the world watched what looked like a modern fairy tale. A royal wedding at Windsor Castle. A bright white gown, a long veil, a woman stepping into history while millions watched from their living rooms, phones, and office screens. It was presented as a moment of joy, unity, and progress. A new chapter for the monarchy. But something about that picture didn't sit right. Look past the dress, past the cameras, past the polished smiles. Look at the seats. On one side sat the British royal family, row after row, generations deep. On the other side, there was just one person, Meghan's mother, Doria, sitting completely alone. No sisters, no brothers, no cousins, no aunts, no uncles. Just one woman placed in full view of the world, directly across from the Queen herself. That wasn't an accident. Weddings are about family, even small ones, especially historic ones. And yet, at the biggest wedding of Meghan's life, her entire extended family was missing. Not late, not stuck in traffic, not quietly seated out of frame, missing. The image was strange enough that people noticed it instantly, even if they didn't understand why it felt uncomfortable. One woman, against an institution that measures its history in centuries, one empty side of the church where laughter, whispers, and shared glances should have been. The palace knew how it looked. Everyone did. And yet, they chose that image anyway, which raises the first uncomfortable thought. If this was supposed to be a celebration of unity, why did it look like isolation instead? Subscribe to Royal Daily Report for investigations that matter. That single decision to let Doria sit alone is where this story truly begins. When something doesn't add up, the mind naturally starts asking questions. Not wild ones, simple ones. And in this story, there are 4 questions that hover over everything, whether anyone wants to say them out loud or not. Did the royal family know? Did Meghan's father know? Did Meghan herself know? And perhaps the hardest question of all, did Doria know? These questions aren't dramatic, they're logical. Because secrets don't exist in a vacuum. They exist inside people, inside decisions, inside silence. By the time the engagement was announced, Meghan's life was no longer private. Every detail was being examined, cataloged, and prepared for public consumption. That's how royal life works. Backgrounds are checked, histories are traced, family trees are mapped out and published for the world to see. Nothing is casual at that level, which means if something unusual existed in Meghan's family history, it wouldn't have gone unnoticed. It would have been seen, discussed, evaluated, and handled. Handled how? That's where the silence begins to speak. Because instead of openness, what followed was distance. Instead of inclusion, there was careful separation. Instead of explanation, there was a quiet agreement to say nothing and hope no one looked too closely. But someone did look, and what they found wasn't loud. It wasn't scandalous on the surface. It was something far more unsettling. A blank space. Royal Daily Report uncovers what was meant to stay hidden. When Meghan and Harry's engagement was announced, British newspapers did what they always do. They published her genealogy, a full family tree neatly laid out generation by generation. Names, dates, places, a visual history meant to reassure the public that everything was in order. But buried inside those charts was something that shouldn't have been there. Or rather, something that wasn't where Doria's mother's name should have been. There was nothing. Just a blank space. No explanation, no footnote, no correction later issued. At first glance, it might seem like a simple error. Records get messy, names get lost. But this wasn't a single document. Across multiple records, the same omission appeared again and again. Always the same missing piece. A mother without a mother. That's not a small detail. That's one of the most basic facts in any family tree. And when something that basic is missing repeatedly, it stops looking like a mistake and starts looking like a decision. People tried to make sense of it quietly. Maybe there had been an adoption. Maybe the information was incomplete. Maybe the records just hadn't caught up yet. But time passed and nothing was filled in. The blank remained, and that blank did something powerful. It invited a question no one wanted to answer. What would happen if that name was written down? Because whatever it was, someone had decided it was safer to leave an empty space than to tell the full story. And that empty space would not stay empty forever. For 8 long months after the wedding, that blank space stayed exactly where it was. No correction, no clarification, no quiet updates slipped into the records. Don't miss this. Subscribe to Royal Daily Report. And then slowly, without announcement or explanation, a name appeared. Janet Arnold. Just like that, the empty space that had raised so many questions was suddenly filled. Janet Arnold, born in 1929 in Sandusky, Ohio, died in the year 2000. A full lifespan, a real person, a real name. And once there was a name, everything changed because names unlock doors. They lead to birth certificates, death certificates, burial records, census listings, church documents, the kind of records that don't tell stories with emotion, but with dates, places, and undeniable connections. Before Janet Arnold, there was nothing to trace. After Janet Arnold, there was no place left to hide, and the timing mattered. This wasn't discovered years later by chance. This name surfaced after the wedding, after the vows were said, after the world had already accepted the fairy tale. Which raises a quiet but unsettling thought. If this information existed all along, why did it only become visible once it was too late to turn back? That single question pushed the story forward, because now the trail was open, and the deeper it went, the stranger it became. At first, the records looked normal. Janet Arnold had a father named James T. Arnold. He was born in 1909 and died young in 1939, at just 30 years. Old Janet's mother was listed as Natalie May Allen, sometimes called Nettie May. She was born in South Carolina in 1897 and lived into her 80s. There were burial sites, cemetery names, dates that lined up the way dates usually do. On the surface, it was just another American family tree stretching backward through time. Royal Daily Report reveals the records no one wanted found. Natalie May's parents were listed clearly, her father. Her mother, a woman named Gertrude Elizabeth Sadler. Born in the 1800s, passing away in the late 1950s. Nothing shocking yet, nothing that would justify years of silence. But family trees aren't meant to be read quickly. They're meant to be examined slowly, line by line, branch by branch. And when the other side of Janet's family was traced, her father's side, something odd appeared. James T. Arnold also had parents listed, a father and a mother. Her name was Gertrude Elizabeth Sadler Arnold. The same name, same birth year, same death year, same woman. At first, it didn't feel real. The kind of detail you assume must be a coincidence. A common name, a clerical mix-up, something easily explained. Except it wasn't. Because every record pointed to the same conclusion. There weren't two women with the same name. There was one. This is the point in the story where everything slows down because what comes next is not easy to hear. And once it's said, there's no way to soften it. According to the records that emerged once the family tree was fully traced, Janet Arnold, Meghan's grandmother, was allegedly born from a relationship between two half-siblings. Her parents, James T. Arnold and Natalie May Allen, shared the same mother. That detail changes the entire meaning of the blank space. This wasn't a distant connection. It wasn't a confusing overlap. It wasn't something that could be explained away with time or context. It was a direct bloodline loop. Keep watching Royal Daily Report for the full truth. The documents don't whisper this, they state it plainly, and immediately they are careful to add a legal shield. The word alleged, not because the records are unclear, but because the implication is severe. This kind of relationship was never considered acceptable. Not socially, not legally, not even in eras where royal families married cousins to preserve power. And that explains the fear. Because this wasn't just an uncomfortable family detail. This was the kind of truth that reshapes how a lineage is seen. The kind of truth that forces institutions to choose between exposure and silence. And silence won for decades. By the time Meghan became seriously involved with Prince Harry, her life was no longer her own. The royal household doesn't leave things to chance. Backgrounds are examined thoroughly, not out of curiosity, but out of protection. And according to the same records that revealed this family structure, those details would have been visible to anyone who looked closely enough, which means the palace likely knew. And if they knew the next decision wasn't about morality, it was about risk. How much of this could be exposed? Who could speak? What would happen if the wrong person talked? That context suddenly gives new meaning to the wedding. Why only one family member appeared? Why Doria was seated alone? Why no extended relatives were given visibility, microphones, or proximity? It wasn't personal. It was strategic. Subscribe to Royal Daily Report. We investigate what matters. The image may have looked awkward, but it was controlled. And controlled optics were safer than unpredictable conversations, loose memories, or accidental truths shared over champagne. In that light, Doria's isolation wasn't neglect, it was containment. The concern didn't stop at embarrassment. According to the records cited, there were deeper fears. The kind discussed quietly behind closed doors, without press statements or official acknowledgement. Inbreeding is known to increase genetic risks. That is an opinion. It's medical fact. And when a family tree folds back on itself, those risks become part of the conversation. The implication is chilling that conversations may have taken place where Harry was shown documents, where words were chosen carefully, where the issue wasn't love, but legacy. Imagine sitting in a quiet palace room being told something about the woman you love that even she may struggle to say out loud. Imagine realizing that a secret older than both of you could follow any future children you might have. Whether those concerns changed anything or not, they explained the urgency. Why silence wasn't optional, why this couldn't be explained away later, why once the marriage happened, the safest option was to say nothing and hope the past stayed buried. But secrets rarely stay buried forever. When you look back now, certain choices start to make sense. Meghan's distance from many of her US relatives, the absence of public family gatherings. Doria appearing only when absolutely necessary, then retreating again into privacy. None of this proves guilt. None of it assigns blame. No one chooses how they are born. The scandal here isn't blood. It isn't ancestry. It isn't history. It's the cover-up. Because when powerful people decide that silence is safer than truth, that silence becomes a character in the story. It shapes behavior. It dictates optics. It forces people into isolation they didn't ask for. That blank space on the family tree wasn't empty by accident. It was empty because filling it in would have told a story no one was ready to hear. And yet, here it is. A missing name, a hidden mother, a family tree that loops back on itself. In a royal wedding where what wasn't shown mattered more than what was, the record ends with a warning, not about scandal, but about secrecy. Because history doesn't destroy powerful families. Cover-ups do. And once a secret is uncovered, the silence around it becomes louder than the truth ever could. That is the story Meghan carried into the royal world. Not just her own choices, but the weight of a past everyone worked very hard to keep buried. That's our controversial investigation for today from Royal Daily Report. A blank space in a family tree that revealed a secret decades old. We'll continue following this story and all royal developments. Subscribe to Royal Daily Report and hit the bell icon for alerts on new investigations. Thank you for watching Royal Daily Report, where we report the stories that change everything.